Hi, this is Leonard from Cosmic Sound, and we're coming to you today from the Cosmic DJ department, and we're going to be talking about some relatively recent DJ controllers that have been released by Behringer. There's a new range called the CMD range. You see some of them here. They're really good. We want to take you through a few of them and show you what they're all about. So let's get straight into it. So the first one we're going to check out is the LC1. So that's this unit over here. It's probably most suited to Ableton use. They also do provide you with a couple of TSIs for Tractor to either control Tractor or control Tractor remix decks. But from the look of it, it's obviously pretty great for using with Ableton, so that's what I'm going to show you today. So what I've got here, we've got 8 knobs at the top, and I've got a couple of devices there set up on this track in Ableton that I can pretty easily control with the knobs I've got here. So I've got, you'll see there, I'm controlling the gain. So these all automatically map to whatever device is selected. So I can control all kinds of things with that. If I then say chose another device here, then the knobs will start controlling other things. So the next section we've got here are these rows of buttons labeled 1 to 8. So you can do a couple of things with this. As I showed you before when I had my effects loaded, I can jump to that with this view here, and I can actually change what track I want to look at as well. So these 4 buttons at the bottom, I can change tracks. So I'll select the one that I had my effects on. Another really cool thing is that I can actually cycle through the effects using these buttons here. So if I had a big string of them, I can just select whichever one I want. And we've also got a button here, number 2, to actually turn the device on and off. So below that, this is probably the most familiar section. It's pretty much like if you had a launch pad or an APC 40 or push, very similar application. We've got a section of buttons here that we can use to trigger different clips from Ableton. So as you will see, I can very easily start a clip playing here. I can add more onto them. So pretty similar to what you'd know from any other Ableton-based controller. So the next section here, we've got these bottom 3 rows of buttons, and we can do a couple of different things with these. So this row here you can use to stop your clips if you need to. These ones here are very useful because they're actually used to move the box that you see on the screen so that you can control different clips with the upper section. So I've got one here that will move the box up and down. I've got one here that'll move it left and right, so if you have lots of tracks in there, it makes it very easy to get through them. The bottom ones here are mostly just transport controls if you need those, and then these ones are pretty self-explanatory. So we can mute any of the channels, we can solo any of the channels, and then this just arms them to record or selects them if you need to do that with a MIDI track. Of course, these are all standard MIDI devices, so you can actually use this in any way you want. So you can custom map that in any way you want. They provide an Ableton script on the website, but you're not limited to having to use that. You can make this function however it best works for you. Another really cool thing about this, and indeed with all of these controllers, is they don't need drivers. So it's pretty much a plug and play deal. The only thing you need to download is if you want to use their Ableton scripts or their Tractor map files, their TSIs. Other than that, you just plug it in and go. So great product for anybody doing any grid-based music production or performance. Perfect for Ableton Live. Can also be used with Tractor as well, either to just play back things from Tractor or probably even better to map for the remix decks. So next up we're going to look at one which is actually a really good complement to the LC one that I just showed you. This is the DC one. So we've got a few sections on this. The top part I'll come back to in a minute. Of course we have got 8 endless rotary encoders below here. We have a section of buttons here, and then we have this grid of larger buttons at the bottom. So probably the simplest thing that you would notice with this is that it's very well set up to be controlling drums. So we've got 16 pads here which we could use to control drums. Unfortunately they're not velocity sensitive, so they'll only be used for triggering. They're not going to be giving you any dynamics to each sound, but they are very useful for playing in drum parts if you are happy with the velocities to be all set. So having said all that, the choices that you actually get from Behringer for this controller, there's a couple of TSIs for Tractor that you get to either use it to manipulate remix decks or looping, or there's a couple of different options. There's also an Ableton script for this one as well, which is what I've got loaded here right now. The interesting thing with the Ableton script is they have set it up very similar to the LC one. so that this grid at the bottom is actually controlling clips in Ableton, not a drum rack. So I would suggest with that, I'm sure there are other people that have already created these things and put them online, but I mean, to me it makes sense to actually create your own map for this to be used to triggering drums or whatever else you might want to trigger. So the way they've got it set up, we've got 8 knobs here which I can use to control the devices. So I'll just jump back to my track with my effects. So there you go, we'll just scoot across to that one there. So these buttons here are the same as on the LC1. We can use them to shift between inserts. So you'll now see I've got some knobs here that I can use to control different parameters in Ableton. The rest of it is pretty self-explanatory. So clips here. This one here we can use for track select, so we can move left and right. There we go. So we've got a choice of 4 that we can select there. That's pretty much it for the main part of the controller. The top section is a little bit different. So you have 4 different modes, which dictates what this knob and these 4 buttons will do. So I'll just take you through each one of these now and explain it a little bit. So the first one we'll use is called session mode, which is probably the most useful of them all actually. So we click this button on the far left and that puts us in session mode. So basically it dictates what these 4 buttons here and this one knob in the middle will do. So the knob, very simply, I move it up and down, the box goes up and down in Ableton. We've got these 2 top buttons here which we can use to move the entire box left and right. And then down here we've got a tap tempo button, and the furthest one over here we can use to stop all the clips that are playing. So if I just quickly get a couple of things going, so move my box back up to the top. So we've got some clips playing now. If I want to stop them all, I would just hit that. So the next mode we'll talk about is one called scene mode. So I'd activate that by pressing the far right button here at the top, and then again it will actually change what these buttons and the encoder do in the middle. So the top ones here very simply can move between the different tracks. I can go left and right. The knob in the middle will enable me to move up and down in terms of the scene. You'll see the light grey line moving across there. And then what I can also do is I can trigger independent clips depending which channel I have in focus by pressing in on the encoder, like so. Or if I want to activate the entire scene, I can do that by pressing the button at the bottom right. And there it goes. We've just got a tap tempo button on the far side here. If I want to stop everything, I can easily jump back to the original mode that we were in and stop everything from there. Alright, so the next mode we've got is called loop mode. So we select that by using the bottom left button here, and then the controllers here will now control loops. So if I get this track playing again, there we go. So that's a loop activated. I can deactivate the loop by pressing in the encoder. And then once we have the loop happening, I can actually reduce and grow the size of the loop. So there we go. Each time I press this, it'll halve the size of the loop. And each time I go this way, it will double the size of the loop. So the final mode we've got is called transport mode. So again, we will select the bottom right button to get this one happening, and then this one's actually a pretty simple mode. We've got very simply a play button here for the entire set. We have got a stop button on this side. We've got a record arm here, and then we've got a session record arm over this side. So that was the DC1. Again, very useful controller if you want to use it with Ableton. Works with Tractor as well. Of course, these controllers also come free with Decadance software, and you'll have absolutely no problems running any of these without software either. So the next couple of controllers I'm going to show you are much more geared at standard DJ software like Tractor or indeed Decadance, which comes with the hardware. They're definitely designed to be part of a modular system, and they work really well if you actually have more than one of them, or a combination of the different controllers. I'll take you through this one first, which is called the DV1. Very, very handy little controller. Enables you to control a few things like effects, filters, you can create cue points, and looping is the other thing that it's really good for. So we've got a few rows of encoders here and some buttons surrounding them. The very top ones here are effects ones. So what we can do here, we can actually, it's almost like a bit of a modular system that any of these effects can be routed to any of the effects banks. So we've got 4 selectors along the top, so I can select effects 1, and you'll see then when I move the knobs on that, they control the parameters on effects 1. If I press effects 2, what will happen now is this top row can now control effects slot 2. So it's almost like a matrix setup where you can use any row of knobs to control any of the effects slots. Effects slots 3 and 4 aren't actually shown in Traktor by default, but they are in the software. Most people don't have them turned on because you'd need extra controllers to control them, but the beauty of this controller is it can do all of them just from one controller. The next row of knobs we've got down here are supposed to control the filter, but they're actually set up to control the key at the moment. That's very, very easy to remap though, if that's a problem for anybody. If we move down below that, we've got 4 A, B, C, D buttons here, which are used to control each of the 4 decks. And then these 3 buttons here will actually dictate what these buttons do depending on what mode they're in. If we press focus, for example, we can shift the focus between the different decks. If I press master, it will choose which deck is sending the master clock to the other decks. And if I choose double, what will happen there is I can actually double any of the tracks up if I wanted duplicate copies of any of those. So the row of buttons we've got here is basically the looping values, and we've got another row of buttons here that actually can change some options for that. You'll see on each of the buttons here there are 2 values. So we've got a 16th and a 1, we've got an 8th and a 4, we've got a quarter and an 8, and we've got a half and 16. So basically, depending which of the buttons here we have selected, different looping values will apply. So if I get a track playing, all right, and I'm going to just create some loops here. So you'll see I've got a 16th at the moment. I can actually change the size of that loop as I go. And if I want to make that loop bigger than I can actually get from the row of buttons as they are, I'll just click the button down the far end. And then you'll see this jump to 1 bar, 4 bars, 8 and 16 bars. So that's pretty much the looping. We've got a couple of other buttons in the middle here, just for creating cue points and for deleting them. And then the very simple part down here, we've got 1 to 8, which we can use to store cue points. So I'll just jump out of that loop. And for example, I could put a cue point here. We'll just jump to a completely different part. I'll put another cue point here, and then I can very easily jump between different parts of the track. So that's the DV1, really good controller, especially for controlling parameters within your software that aren't very easy to do without a controller. It's definitely not a DJ controller in itself. You'll need something else to, initiate playback to control the actual track, manipulate the pitch. So this one, very good if you need something to control effects, filters, and cue points, absolutely perfect. So the next one we're going to look at is the PL1, which I've got here. This one's really handy, possibly the most handy out of all of these, as it's very compact and also controls a large number of different things. At the very top here we've got a row or 2 rows of 4 encoders here. These are all push button encoders as well, and these we're going to use to control the effects in Traktor. If we move down further, we've got the just cue points here, 1 to 8 cue points. The bottom section here is a lot more familiar in terms of traditional DJ controllers. The beauty of this is we can actually use this one controller to control any of the decks at our disposal. So I've got a deck button here that I can use to select different decks 1 through 4. I have got transport controls at the bottom here, so I can get the track playing, for example. I can initiate the sync feature if I wanted to sync with other tracks, especially if you only had this controller and you were trying to control 4 decks at once. So I've got sync feature there. I've got tap tempo if I need that. Obviously my main controls down here for setting back to my original cue and initiating my playback. I've also got buttons here that I can use to jump between different sections. And then I've got basic pitch bend here. So we'll jump back up to the middle section here. This is the jog wheel, exactly as you would find on nearly any DJ controller at all. We've got 2 modes we can operate this in. At the moment I've got this in scratch mode, so I can use this to actually move through the track. If I was to touch it on just the side, I'll get my normal push-pull. If I change the mode here, we'll go back into just normal mode. Now everything is push-pull, so I can't actually scratch it all. So finally we've got a pitch fader here. Obviously you'd be out of sync mode if you're using this, and we just have a very simple pitch control. So finally up the top here we've got 2 buttons. This one's actually used to load tracks. I must say though, there's no control on this unit to actually browse tracks, but you could quite easily map something on there to do that. The final button down here, we've got a key lock button, which we can turn on and off from here for keeping the pitch constant or variable. So we've been looking here at the Behringer CMD PL1. Fantastic controller, absolutely essential if you need something to control Tractor or the included software Decadance. Very useful, but definitely worth being paired with one of the other controllers in the range. So next up, we've got one of my favorite ones actually. This is the CMD Micro controller. This one's extremely handy due to its portability. It's very small, but has lots of things going on it. Really good for people if you were traveling and you needed to take something with you. Great if you're doing things at home and you don't have a lot of desk space, or if you do online radio shows and don't want to invest in a much bigger controller. This one's absolutely perfect. So let's just run through a few of the things we've got on here. Essentially, this is just a completely stock DJ controller, has only the essential things on it, which for me actually makes it really good. So let's have a look at some of the things we've got on this controller. So of course, very simply, we've got some level controls. So we've got a crossfader happening in the middle here. These are our 2 level controls, which affect our decks levels. We've got 2 more faders either side to control our pitch, like so. And then we've just got a pile of buttons spread around here. We've got one that we can use for loading to each deck. Of course, we've actually got a knob here to browse through our tracks now as well. And we can very simply load to each deck. We've got a couple of cue points that we can choose from as well. Sync buttons, basic transport controls. We've got pitch bend here as well if you don't want to use the jog wheel. And then finally, of course, we have the jog wheel itself. They're very small on this. We don't get a choice of modes. So you use it, scratch for the top, and we've got our usual push-pull mode on the side of the controller. So finally, we've just got a couple of buttons here which we can use to activate the cues to send to our headphones as well. So that's it there, the CMD Micro. Really, I think, and a pretty essential controller. Great if you need something portable that you need to move around, or if you're in a small space. Absolutely perfect. So the final one we're going to look at is the CMD Studio 4A. As you can see, it's much bigger than a lot of the other ones we've showed you. It's also much more fully fledged in terms it can control a piece of software on its own. It's definitely a competitor for other products on the market, so this is definitely a viable alternative to some of those. Let's run through some of the things we've got on the controller. So first of all, very simply, we have a mixer section in the middle. So we have got track faders here. We've got a crossfader in the middle. We've also got 3-band EQ here, which I can use to control the EQ, and we've got kill switches for each band as well. It's probably a good time to mention that this setup is not limited to 2 decks as it may appear. We actually have buttons on either side to change between A and C deck and B and D on this side. So if I was to do this, for example, I'll change to deck C. I now have control of the fader and the EQ for the alternate decks. So moving on from there, what else have we got going on? We've got pitch faders on each side for manual mixing. We've got some buttons down the bottom which are 8 hot cues which we can store there. We've also got a button to delete them. We've got very simply playback controls at the bottom, transport controls, sync button here. We've also got pitch bend on buttons if you don't want to use the push-pull feature of the jog wheel. And finally, we've got the section at the top here. So we've got effects control here. Each knob, of course, controls one from within the software, and then we have buttons here to trigger any of the relevant features of the software. In the example here, I can use each of these buttons here to turn the effects on. On the deck in which I just have one effect loaded, I can use that to turn the deck on, and I have the other buttons for controlling the various parameters within the software. Browsing and loading tracks. Very easy on this controller. I've got a rotary over here which I can use to pick tracks, and then I have a load button here on each side to load the deck to whichever deck is in focus on each side. Finally, we've got some looping controls here. So I'll just get a track going to show you this one. So there we go. We've got that playing now. I'll just give you some level. And for looping, very easy. I just need to turn looping on. I've got a loop happening there, and I can just very simply expand and contract the size of the loop with these 2 buttons here, and very easily turn it off again. So the final one to mention on here, we have got a big jog wheel, so much easier to work with than any of the smaller ones. If I have a track playing again, we've got 2 modes we can be in. Currently I've just got this controller in the normal push-pull mode, so it does exactly the same thing whether you grab it on the top or on the side. I can click this button here to put it into scratch mode, and then I have complete control over the track as if it was a record or CD. Just another cool thing to mention with this, you can see we've actually got some metering on here as well, which is extremely handy, pretty essential thing to be able to see how much level you're putting out. And then we've actually got a main volume control over here as well that we can use to adjust the level that we're seeing here. So we've been checking out the CMD Studio 4A. As I said before, this is an excellent controller and a very viable alternative to products such as the S4 or any of the other controllers for Tractor. Again, we can use this with Decadence as well, which is supplied with the product. Like all the other controllers, it's built extremely well. Feels very solid to use. The only difference you have with the other ones is it's actually a powered controller as well, so you do need to plug it into some wall power. The other thing we should mention with this one as well is it actually has a sound card built into it. So we have got headphone controls here, so we can mix between the master and the cue, and we've also got a phones level here. So, and as there is a sound card built in with this unit, we've got 4 RCA outputs on the back, 2 pairs that is, which you can use to run to either your main out, booth speakers, wherever else you might want to send it. So we've been looking at the Behringer range of CMD DJ controllers today. As you can see from what we've showed you, it's a very modular idea and you can combine them in various combinations to work with whatever it is you're trying to do, whether you're using traditional DJ software like Tractor or Decadence, or whether you're indeed doing things with Ableton Live. Some general things I can say about all these products is they're built very well, they feel rock solid, everything on them feels quality as well. We're very much impressed with these. Of course, with the Studio, it's really great because we have the sound card built in, which makes it a much more complete idea. Certainly when you're using software like Tractor, the common problem is if you use just a normal MIDI controller that does not have a sound card built in, is you don't get your headphone queuing. So you'll often have to carry around an external sound card with you as well. Of course, that's not a problem with this one. With all the smaller ones as well, very, very good quality. Probably a thing we can say about all of them is they're extremely affordable, so definitely a really good way of getting into some hardware to go with your DJ software. Having said that, they definitely haven't cheaped out on this. They're extremely high quality products. So for any more information about any of these products, please come in and see us at our Osborne Park or Cannington branches, or check us out online at cosmic.com.au.